Hello again, fellow rowers. This is Landro off of LandroeGaming, bringing you my first experience of PvP with the new Mr. Pandaria talents. It's 85, so it's patch 5.0.4, and I had a little bit of a mess around earlier on Darkmoon Fair Shadow, and it's fair to say they're in a pretty good state at the moment. But I thought I'd go back to my roots and give Disc Priest a go. Quite a lot has changed for Disc Priest. Gone is Mana Burn, so it's a highly effective spell from our arsenal. Mind Control, another very well utilised spell, is of course now a talent, first tier talent tree, and it's probably not one you're going to go for in most situations, purely because the other two, Void Tendrils and Siphena, are so powerful by comparison. And the biggest thing that I noticed on my first little go in PvP here is just how much the Dispel nerf affects mass PvP. Having an 8-second cooldown on your Dispel is massive, especially if you've got, you know, a Frost Mage that novas 3 or 4 people in place. You've got Mass Dispel, which has now been given a 15-second cooldown. As you can see there, I didn't use it very wisely. I saw the Mage Ice Block and out of habit, which I'm going to have to change as the new PvP content goes. My first instinct was to Mass Dispel, so it's obviously going to have to change now. But as I was saying, you've got a cooldown on your Dispel now, so there's no more spam dispelling a class, or your allies, I should say. You still got the offensive Purge type Dispel, which hasn't really changed. And I noticed in this BG just how powerful Spell Steal is now. There's no, you know, I saw mages who were doing 30-40 dispels, or it's classed as a dispel in the BG. But I had great fun. It's not to say those changes, or those main changes there, have broken the class entirely. It just means it's a little bit different now with their playstyle. Shields are quite powerful at this stage, but so is the damage going around. Renew is a very, very powerful spell now, whilst Glyphed, it was always utilised a lot more in PvP for Disc Priests because of its instant cast nature, but I found that it was very powerful in terms of how much it healed as well. As you can see here, I get ganked by a few melee. This was primarily because I wasn't utilising my spells to their maximum potential. And as far as I'm aware, I wasn't silenced there, I wasn't stunned. I'm not quite sure why I couldn't cast, so I've got to read up on other classes. I think that's the biggest thing with healers for the changes. It's not only the changes that have happened to themselves, and obviously things like mana now, massive constraints on mana, it's the changes that have happened to other classes as well, which are relevant, and what silences and stuns and interrupts and whatnots they've got now. It's going to take a whole nother expansion to learn it all over again, just like we did at the start of Cataclysm. So it makes things interesting. I enjoyed the general playstyle. It's still a little bit much directed towards a gank fest. It seemed, obviously we can't read too much into it at this stage of an expansion. You know, this is only the talent changes with the prelude to the actual, you know, new content coming out, so all things might balance out a little bit. But it seemed that it was literally pick your target and gank. As I said, I had to go as a Disc Priest, as a Shadow Priest I should say, in the Darkmoon Fair arena, and I had one healer with me, and needless to say, you are incredibly powerful. But that's Shadow Priest. You know, I'm sure there's lots of actual skilled Shadow Priests out there doing videos that you could probably go and read up on. I'm a Disc Priest by trade, so you guys have probably come or stumbled across this video with a view to seeing what I think of it. The changes to Atonement give us a lot more utility on the DPS front in PvP. We always were a class that were quite good on with regards to the damage we could do with Mind Spike Mind Blast combos. Now both those spells are no longer disc spells, they are solely within the Shadow School. They're shadow specialization spells, so we can't actually use those anymore, so we have to use our Smites and Holy Fire. And as you can see, I've gone with the instant Holy Fire Glyph, which I found very, very good in PvP. The less chance you've got of being interrupted, the better. I also went with Mind Bender. I think Power Word Solace could have a lot of play, it could have a lot of potential, probably in Arena, I don't know. I mean, Mindbender does good burst as well, and it's only on a minute cooldown, so it can be used quite regularly. The problem with Mindbender is it can be CC'd, and of course the problem with Solace is it's a hard cast spell, so you have to find the time to be able to cast it and not get interrupted. Now, the change to our offensive spells, not so much Holy Fire as I mentioned with the Glyph, it's an instant cast spell, but the change with Smite is you can be locked out of your healing school, which is obviously not what you want. So whereas you could Mind Spike and Mind Blast free in the knowledge that if you were interrupted, it almost in a way was beneficial because you knew you could heal freely. Now we've got to be much more aware of interrupts when we are doing our damage. But yeah, I mean, I think they're heading along the right way. There's still changes to be made. There's still lots of bugs. I went with Void Tendrils for this, which literally seemed to work 1 out of 10 times I used them, which was very bizarre. So the second video, which I'll be posting later, which was another BG that I'd done, I switched back out to Fiend, which was infinitely more powerful, and in fact I think it's probably a little bit too overpowered at the moment with regards to the range that it has for its fear. Some of the other little bugs in BGs, obviously I was trying to get the map up there and it just didn't bring up a map, it just put my ally as a focus. But I stumbled across a pretty decent team here. We managed to win this BG quite comfortably. But yeah, it was more of a learning curve for me, as I said. Learning the way the new Dispels work was the biggest thing that I noticed in terms of the healing and the DPS and stuff. It was much of a muchness as it was before. A little bit more powerful heals, a little bit more powerful DPS. It kind of, in a funny way, balances out a little bit. I mean, I do think that the burst gank fest kind of thing is still there, which is not that enjoyable for a healer unless you've got peelers and allies with you. But you know, generally it wasn't too bad. Dispels, that's the thing that's going to be the hardest to get used to. Instinctively dispelling as is the way, as has been the way for most healers. Now it's going to take a lot of thinking of when you should dispel and what spells you should be dispelling, and you need to make sure you've got your dispel available for times when it's going to be needed. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all works. As you can see, there's another annoying bug here for penance, which once you penance somebody, you move where they move, so I ended up getting line of sighting myself by by being spun around with penance, which wasn't ideal. But and a very interestingly placed bubble there. I don't quite know what I was doing. It's one of the interesting things about doing the commentary on these videos when I watch them back. Obviously you can't necessarily do the same commentary in game as you can when you're watching it back. Is you find out, you get to learn the mistakes you make as much as anything, and that was certainly one of them. But the general gist of this PvP was quite fun. I think we had a couple of healers on this team, which obviously stands you in good stead. I've got quite good PvP gear, which means things like the newly introduced PvP power meant I was around about 60% resilience. They've changed the 4 set for Disc Priest as well. No longer does the bubble remove movement impairing effects and give you a small speed increase, which was a spell that I absolutely loved. It now increases what they still called resilience in the tooltip, but I'm guessing it's the PvP resilience now, by 1100, around about 10%, so it's still quite well utilised. It's still quite a powerful spell, but at the same time it does mean that if you want the movement increase or the movement impairing effect removal, you now need to take Fade, and I did for this instance, but I'm still thinking there's going to be a lot of utility for Body and Soul in a PvP environment. I mean, a 60% what is effectively a sprint on demand is going to be very, very powerful. There's a lot more diversity in the talents now. I think Blizzard's done a pretty good job of saying or actioning their words by not giving a cookie cutter spec or a cookie cutter build. There's quite a lot of interesting things that can be made from various different specs, and the way that certain spells homogenize with certain other spells and certain glyphs, it does make it very interesting. But at the same time, I mean, there are spells that are very powerful in certain situations, and ones that you will be taking most of the time. So I think that's a given. That's not really going to change, just purely because the nature of of how classes counter each other, and if you're getting endlessly ganked by a certain class, then you'll inevitably try to come up with a talent or glyph or build that will negate that class's power of you. So it does work both ways. The interesting thing with the PvP changes, I found it very hard. A lot of the add-ons are very buggy, and a lot of the spells are kind of buggy, I suppose. There were some interesting things that were happening, but it did get across to me that, like I said earlier, it's not just about me learning my class and learning changes that I've got to make to my playstyle. Every class has changed massively, and just like we've got many variants to our class talents and our glyphs and whatnot, so have other classes. So it's going to take a lot of research and a lot of time to learn everything that's changed. But the interesting thing is, at the moment, I mean, this is actually something that is interesting now. The line of sight issue on some of the things now has come into play a bit more in PvP, whereas before line of sight was simply not an issue. Now there are a lot more things that line of sight you that wouldn't have before. The clever blink there by that mage to get out of the way. And so that's again something little that's been fixed, which actually has huge implications, especially for large BGs where there's lots of potential to line of sight people. Hugely important part of healer play is your positioning. As in Dalaran Arena, when you're Darkmoon Arena, when everybody's literally in each other's faces, it was very interesting to have that the fact that you've got people on you endlessly. There's no way of getting around them. We had good fun in there, but the actual PvP BGs gives you a lot more chance to position yourself better. What happened here, it was interesting to note that actually oomed, and that's something that never used to really happen with Disc Priests in PvP. As you see, a cleverly used Mind Bender there, which is highly ineffective, but also my Hymn of Hope through my my add-on wasn't working, so I had to go into my spellbook and find Hymn of Hope and channel that. Not ideal in a PvP environment, but yeah, this team we were up against, we had the upper hand on, and literally it was a case of just going and having a bit of fun. I'm not a huge fan of graveyard ganking. I think it is something that needs to be fixed a little bit. I think a few second immunity to new reses is needed in BGs. It can be countered in many ways. I think one of the things that annoys some classes is not so relevant now, perhaps with the changes, but it was having to buff and the benefit or survivability you gain from your buffs. When graveyard ganking was going on and you had a fully buffed team of 4 or 5 people up against 4 or 5 that were rezzing unbuffed and were at 50% HP before they could do anything, it wasn't very enjoyable. I think now that every class has lost a few of their buffs, it's fixed things a little bit. But I would like to see I'd like to see a very brief immunity for new reses, so they can then buff freely. They wouldn't be allowed to carry flags. They wouldn't be allowed to. Maybe wouldn't even be allowed to move. Maybe they're frozen the spot on the counter of the 30-second counter that you get when you res, or whatever it is. For the last 2 seconds, perhaps you can actually activate your character, buff yourself, but you're still in almost like a spirit form, and then boom, you're good to go. I think that would be a good implementation for Blizzard to consider, whether they will or not. They seem to make a myriad of changes that don't need to be changed, and things that probably should be changed kind of sit there for several patches or several days, several months without getting fixed. But I suppose that's the nature of the beast. They probably prioritise things from their perspective rather than from every casual gamer's perspective. So it was interesting to see. But yeah, in general, I think things are looking positive for Disc Priest. We've gained a little bit more utility. We've gained a little bit more CC. We've lost some of our niche spells, the Mana Burn, the Mind Control, being talented. But we have gained a few things along the way as well. It's PvP. I'm really looking forward to it, Mr. Pandaria. I'm looking forward to the return of mass world PvP. I think they're very, very good fun. I love Tol Barad and I love Walsall Gulch. I love Wintergrass, sorry, this is Walsall Gulch. So it'll be interesting to see how things get changed on that front. One of the things that haven't changed is the absorbs on the meters. It's always been a pet peeve of mine, but I can't grumble too much at that. It's a little thing. I think people that know PvP know the utility of Disc Priest. As you can see, they're pretty good on the damage front. Lots of Dispel still going on. As I mentioned before, mages seem to be doing a lot of Dispels, but that would be via spell steal. Lots of absorbs, of course, that being a niche thing that Disc Priests have. And as you can see, the amount of absorbs and the amount of things that don't get registered on the meters there, you do add a lot to a raid makeup in a PvP environment. So yeah, that's the end of this video. It was very good fun PvP. I'm going to do a lot more videos over the coming days, so thanks for watching, and Landro out.